Hey guys, welcome back to Keys to the Cosmos. This is video number 3 in my new series, Astrophotography Target Tips. I really hope you're able to catch the second one on the North American Nebula. There's the print there. Stay tuned. If you're not already following me on Keys to the Cosmos on Instagram, I suggest you do so. I'm going to be doing a giveaway for this and maybe another print or two as well. So stay tuned for that. Follow me on Keys to the Cosmos on Instagram and there'll be more information about that. But the reason that I wanted to mention that second one is because we talked a lot about the constellation Cygnus, how to locate it and all that. And so we're going to sort of blow through that portion of this video because today we're going to be talking about the Crescent Nebula. And the Crescent Nebula is the neighbor of the North American one. It's just a little bit over another beautiful target in the constellation Cygnus. So we're going to sort of blow through the locating and framing up and focus more on processing because not that there's anything out of the ordinary with this particular target, but in this case, and at the end of this video, I'm going to be showing two images. So I'm going to be showing the wide field version, but I'm also going to be showing the crop version. And what I want to focus on in this video is in particular that cropped image, how to do a cropped image, because I actually process them separately. It's a special tool in Photoshop. You may have never used it before. That's what I want to highlight in this video, how to use that tool to get really nice detail on a cropped image. So stay tuned for that, and of course, for the final images at the end of this video. Now, let's just talk quickly about the Crescent Nebula. That I've mentioned many times, my very first image, here it is. You've seen it before. I always like to look back at it to remind me how far I've come, and it reminds me almost a year ago, June of 2020, that I took that image. Amazing how time flies. But yes, that was the target, the Crescent Nebula. You can barely see it there, but it's there. And I didn't know what I was shooting. I just happened to find something bright and red in the sky, and I went with it and got a whopping 15 minutes. That was shot with the Red Cat 51. I did return to it about, a month and a half later. Shot it again, but same telescope, the Red Cat, and this time I got about an hour and a half. And there's the image there. Not an award-winning image, but a lot better than the first time, and it was nice to see the improvement, the progression, especially on the processing side of things. But you could see the difference right away of 15 minutes compared to an hour and a half's worth of integration time. And so I wanted to return to it again this year. Excuse me. I wanted to go with a little bit more focal length. So this time around I used my Sharp Star 76 millimeter. And I really wanted to soak some time into this one and just see what kind of details I could get, even though that is still a wide field telescope. And of course, I'm still shooting in my terrible Toronto borderline skies. But even still, I wanted to see what I could get. And this time using the L Extreme filter, which I've talked so many times. You guys are probably tired of hearing of it. But what a difference it makes. So what could I get with a lot of integration time, a much better filter, and some more focal length? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So, as I mentioned very quickly, how to locate the Crescent Nebula. It's in the constellation Cygnus. Cygnus is the summer swan. It's located underneath Vega in the eastern sky. Look for the cross. Those are the center stars in the constellation. Last video, number 2 with the North America, we talked about the star Deneb, which is in the tail of Cygnus. We're going to be talking about now the star just over from it in the more of the center. It's called Sadar. Sadar is one of the brighter stars in Cygnus. Super easy to find. And what I usually recommend doing is using Sadar to do your focusing. So whether you have a Bahtinov mask or whatever way you use to focus, balance your mount, all that, polar line, then do your focusing with Sadar. And then all you need to do from Sadar when it comes to locating and sort of framing up your shot is just go up and to the right, and there you'll find the Crescent Nebula. It's more to the right, I would say, than up, but super easy to find, particularly if you're using a wide field refractor. You're going to likely get it in your first or second test shot. And all you really need is I would say 25-30 second shot, and there you'll see it. Fairly easy to find. So that's where to locate it. Constellation Cygnus, find the star Sadar, slightly up and to the right, and there's the Crescent Nebula. Very close. But the star Sadar itself should not be in your shot, unless you're using like a camera lens or something really wide. But I believe even with the Red Cat 51, that star Sadar should not be in the image. So that's how you know how far right you need to go. It should be out of the image. So when it comes to framing it up, again, very simple. I've talked about in this video and in the one before that, IC 1396, how I use surrounding stars. More so not to locate, but to sort of get it in the same position on your DSLR, assuming that you're going to be imaging multiple nights. If you're not, then don't worry so much about it. But in this case, you really don't need to. It's small and bright. So all I tried to do is get this Crescent Nebula dead center of the back of my camera each night. And I took some time to make sure I did that, made fine adjustments, but you'll see in my stacked image that there really wasn't any crazy stacking lines. All I had to do was a quick crop, and I was ready to start processing. So just try to get it dead center, and that's all you really need to worry about with framing. This is a fairly bright target. At least portions of it are anyway, so you can see it quite clearly. And with that being said, here is my single exposure of the Crescent Nebula. This is 60 seconds, again using my Sharp Star, L Extreme filter, and of course riding on my Star Adventure in my Toronto borderline skies. So you can see it quite clearly. The challenging part is getting the lower part of the nebula visible. The upper part is very bright and easy to spot. It's pulling out the details on the lower part that's the trickiest part. So that's where we'll talk about integration time, soaking a little bit more time in, and a little bit more focal length helps definitely as well. So that's it for framing. There's my single exposure. It gives you a good idea of what to look for. Keep in mind I'm using a modded DSLR. That definitely helps bring out the red a little bit more. It might not be so bright if you're using an unmodded DSLR. So just something to keep in mind. Or if you're using a different filter. Now my first two images I used the CLS CCD by I think Astronomic. We've talked about that many times. That's just a light pollution suppression filter, whereas the L Extreme is a narrowband filter. So it's going to block out a lot more light, and that red is going to pop out. So when you use that filter along with a modded DSLR, you definitely get a better quality image. So I suggest that, well, both those things if you're planning on sticking with astrophotography for some time. So there's my single frame. Now let's talk about integration time. This was my longest image ever, 12 hours. That's a long time, I know. And some of you may think, well, that's ridiculous, I could never do that, or no, I don't have enough patience to do that. I get it. And I want to make very clear, you definitely don't need to soak 12 hours into this particular target. I would say anywhere from 4 to 8 is more than enough to get a really quality picture. I've seen images even less. If you happen to be in darker skies, you may not even need as much as 4, but I definitely recommend somewhere between 4 and 8 to really get not only details in the Crescent Nebula, but the beautiful gas around it, because that's what's a beautiful part of shooting this in wide field, is that amazing gas in that Sadar region. All of Cygnus has so much beautiful gas. We're really close to the Milky Way core, right? So there's a lot of stars and a lot of gas. So integration time, we'll talk about what the 12 hours helped, how it helped me, but what realistically you can expect if you're able to shoot somewhere between 4 and 8. But here's my stacked image. So this is 12 hours now. Again, 60-second exposures. And pretty typical. It's a little bit brighter, definitely. You can see a difference right off the bat with the 12 hours of exposure time. You can see some stacking issues on the sides, but I gave myself more than enough room. That's one reason it's good to use a little bit more wide field. And I was able to crop that out no problem and still have a nice wide field view of the Crescent Nebula. So there's my stacked image. And just like that, we're going to go right into processing. Now talking about just sort of from integration time to processing. What are the advantages of 12 hours? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, the Crescent Nebula has a lot of fine details in it itself. And it's a small target. So it will always benefit you to spend more time. So that's definitely one advantage of spending something like 12 hours or even more if you're able to. The other one is too, though, the gas around, as I mentioned already, there's a lot of gas, and it's very like distinct, beautiful gas, as you'll see in my final images. So that really helped. I mean, I barely had to do anything in processing to pull that out, and that's one advantage, of course, when you spend a lot of time, like 12 hours. And the third one is noise. We talked about that in the last video in the North America. Noise is always a problem, particularly with the DSLR. The more time you spend, generally speaking, the less noise you're going to have. And the cleaner the image, the softer the look. It doesn't have that sort of grainy look, particularly in the background gas. So spending something like, anywhere from 4 to 12 hours, as you spend more, generally speaking, you're going to have a lot less noise. And noise is always a problem with astrophotography and something we're always looking to reduce. So those are the biggest advantages of sinking this much time in. So let's talk about specifically processing now. So we'll talk about, first of all, wide field, because as I mentioned, there'll be 2 images to show at the end of this video, and I actually processed them completely separate. Started fresh on the cropped one, and that's what I want to focus in on the second part of this. So let's talk about quickly processing in wide field. Pretty much typical as I would any of my other emission nebula images. It's a matter of stretching and levels adjustment and sort of going one to the other to balance it out. Using the sampler towards the end of your stretching, as I talked about in my second video, make sure you watch that. I talk a lot more about how to do that. It's so important in getting the right tone to the picture, the color range, and the tone that you want. Using that sampler on the background of your image to find what suits your taste. So once you've done that, then of course I do a star reduction, as I always do. That's again my preference. And I will say one of the challenges in the wide field part is you're trying to pull out that gas, but you're also trying not to blow out the Crescent Nebula itself, because the Crescent Nebula is definitely by far the brightest thing in this particular image. So that's where the tricky part comes. I actually did have to try this one a couple times till I was happy. I was able to get nice background gas, but in doing so I sacrificed the Crescent Nebula. It looked very blotchy and blown out, and I just wasn't happy with it. So that took me a couple tries. So what I did was I did a little bit less stretching and pulling the background out before first working on the Crescent Nebula itself. So I would lasso it off, go into camera raw filter, and just sort of play with it, get some detail out of it. Not going crazy, and then unselecting that and selecting the entire image again, and then working on the entire image while keeping my eye on that Crescent Nebula and making sure it wasn't getting blown out, because you definitely don't want to do that. It is the focal part of this image, but there's a lot of other beautiful things in the background. So finding that balance was definitely the trick, and hopefully you'll agree that I did that when you see my final image. Another thing I did as well, when I lassoed off the Crescent Nebula, I just gave it more of a pinkish hue compared to the background, just so it stands out more, a little more pleasing to the eye. In my opinion, again, it might not be to everyone's taste. That's up to you. I always sort of lean that way, and I like it to sort of stand out, so it's sort of the star of the show. And so that's what I did. You'll see that in my wide field version. So yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing out of the ordinary. Watch my other videos where I talk a lot more about those basic sort of editing procedures that I do, and techniques and little tips. And if you haven't watched my processing video in particular, that one I go into a lot more detail about all that stuff and how to do it. But what I want to focus on in this video is the crop version, because as I mentioned, I don't just do one picture and then just simply, after I'm done, crop into the crescent and then use that as my cropped image. Generally speaking, even though I mentioned that I had to find that balance and I didn't want to blow it out, that is true. But if you really zoom in on my wide field version, the crescent's not amazing. It's nice from a wide field standpoint, and that's what I was going for. But when I crop, what I do is I start all over again. So I save my wide field as a JPEG or whatever format you do, and then I start all over with my TIFF file, my stacked file. And what I do is I do a quick stretch so I can see the Crescent Nebula clearly, and then I crop right away. Okay, you might want to crop a little bit bigger, and because you can always crop more, but I do a significant crop right from the start, and then I start processing from there, and that will sort of give you a lot more focus, you could say, on just the details in that Crescent Nebula. You're not so much worried about the background. Of course, you still have to keep your eye on it, but you're focused just on getting detail out of that Crescent Nebula. You're not worried about pulling out the surrounding gas so much. You're just worried about the target itself. So that's why it really helps. And I want to talk about one tool in particular. So again, it's still the same procedure. You're doing a curve stretch. You're doing your all your standard, processing just to sort of pull the color out. But at a certain point, what I do is I still lasso it off because there is some background there. And I go into my camera raw filter. I do my initial editing on the Crescent Nebula itself. Mostly, like, I would say highlights. I fool around with the contrast. What else? I'm trying to think. I fool around with luminance and details. So again, there's that balance where you're softening it, but you're still getting nice detail to it. All that stuff, the structure, slider, and just sort of getting a nice balance where it's popping out color-wise, not blowing out, just nice color, and also trying to get it crisp. But you're going to likely find that it's still not great. And here's where a special tool I wanted to feature. Perhaps you've used it, perhaps you haven't before, but it's called the shake reduction tool. So if you've never used it before, what I do is I lasso off the Crescent Nebula itself, and then I go to filter at the top of, filter in Photoshop. Then I go to sharpen, and then there's another sub-menu, and there's shake reduction. I think it's the top one. And click on that. And that's a tool that you're going to find can really give you that real crisp, sharp image that you're looking for. This is something that you would generally use on like planetary. I use it for galaxies. And this is the first time using it with a mission nebula because this is a little bit of a different target. There's a lot more sharper details than, say, the North America, where it's mostly less a big blob of floating gas, and you're not too worried about those really fine details. But this is one where that shake reduction really helps. So the only thing I will say is you have to fool around with it, see what's to your taste. But generally speaking, I do want to mention when you first click on it, it'll do a preview off of its default settings. Now, normally I think it's the smoothness tab is set at 30. I find that to be too low. It's too sharp. And in particular, you'll notice if you have any stars within your target, they're going to look like cubes. It just looks really unnatural, and it's just too much. So what I usually do is let it do its thing, let it do a preview for you, and then I move that slider over from 30 to somewhere around like 40, 45. And that sort of just smooths it out and takes away that harshness that at first it does. And then you'll see it just sort of gives it a little bit more detail, a little bit crisper image without being over the top. And it's like, whoa, something was done to that. And it looks unnatural. So that's something you have to fool around with. But if you've never tried it, try that shake reduction tool. It's really good. And it really benefited this image. I definitely couldn't have got the results I did without using that. So give that a try. That's sort of what I wanted to focus on this particular video. The shake reduction, if you've never tried it, try it definitely. And this summer when if you're doing planetary or moonshots, try it on that too, because it can be pretty amazing to get those fine details in the planets and the moon that it's so hard to get without using something like that. But that's pretty much it, guys. Hopefully this video helps you. And if you've shot it before and weren't too happy with it, or you've never shot it at all, this should give you everything you need to know to be able to have success in doing that. It's a pretty cool target, and as I mentioned, still good for beginners. Nice and bright, a little bit small, but sink some time into it and you'll be able to get a lot of detail. I'll have my 4th video soon. I'm actually working on the editing right now. I'm really excited about this next one. It's a really unique target, probably one you don't see quite as much as some of the more common ones like North America, Crescent, all those summer targets. This one's a lot more challenging, and you need a really wide field telescope for this. And I'm actually going to have a video before I have that number 4 in our Astrophotography Target tips. I'm going to have a video on that little telescope itself, and just to sort of explain some of its features. So stay tuned for that. I'm really excited about it, and I think you're going to enjoy it. But thanks as always, guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your support. It means a lot. So here are my images of the Crescent in wide field and cropped. Hope you enjoy it, guys. See you on the next one. Take care.